my very first thing was ever on television was going to air that day, and we all watched it together. So the first time I ever saw myself on TV, I was with Cary Grant, and he was full of great advice, not the least of which was, young man, don't ever eat a hot dog on a dais. What? I was like, why? He goes, well, because then there'll be a picture of you with a hot dog in your mouth.
Three Films and a Podcast has no claim of ownership on any film footage used in this episode. All film footage is owned in its entirety by the copyright holders and is used solely with the intent of film criticism, commentary, and education under fair use law. And just like every car in Too Fast, Too Furious, this podcast contains spoilers. Enjoy.
All right, hello everyone, and welcome back to Three Films and a Podcast, the show where three friends work their way through new to them movies in a unique rotating format. My name is Tyler Beck. I'm here in Portland, Oregon, and I'm joined, as always, by Ben Lawhorn.
Hello.
From all the way down in Salt Lake City, and in Pleasant Grove, we have Matthew Weiler.
Hello.
Hello. Matt always has an interesting way to say hello, I feel like. It's becoming his calling card.
It's become my thing. It's a new segment.
Matt's
is high.
Someday when we have a sponsor, we're gonna dedicate that segment to them. Anyways, for those of you familiar with the show, you know how we do things around here. We started this whole show because we had a little 3-person movie club, and we wanted to share that with the outside world, and we wanted to have discussions with other people other than the three of us. I like the discussions we have, but more is better. And with that in mind, we've got a special guest today. His name is Jacob Draper. And say hello.
Hello. I am ecstatic to be here yet again.
Hell yeah. We're very happy to have you back. I was going to say Jacob Draper down in... and then I forgot where you lived. So then I had to audible real quick, and it made things a little bit weird. But we are super happy to have you back. This is your second time on the show. The first time being the time when you lost the movie draft of Ocean's 11.
It was a gracious defeat, which is really big of you to make it to class place. So we appreciate that.
Some bold statements from what I feel like people who operate the Instagram, which is a conflict of interest at the very least.
Yeah. I'm not conflicted about it at all. I'll be honest. I have no problem.
That's an absolute lie. Jacob is our resident Ocean's 11 expert, and as it turns out, it seems like you're a big Hitchcock fan, and when you found out we were going to be doing this week's movie, you hopped on and you messaged immediately, and you just had to do this one. And the movie we're talking about this week is North by Northwest from 1959 by none other than Alfred Hitchcock, because this is the Hitchcock round of 3 films and a podcast. So without further ado, I'm just going to throw it over to our guest, Jake, and I'm going to let him break down the movie for us, and then we will get into our overall impressions of this film.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's funny because it's going back to when I was on last time, I mentioned Mrs. Weiler being an influence for me in movies, and it was about this time.
Love you, Mom.
Again, like, subscribe, call Matt. He's been trying to reach out. Nothing else apparently is going to work. But it was in this point. I'm pretty sure we watched something from Vertigo, and I was like, man, like, this is awesome. It was in a film studies class, and you can't study the history of film without looking at Hitchcock because he's just ridiculously influential and super good. And so from there, using a very, very early subscription to both Netflix and a free trial of Blockbuster trying to do Netflix.
Yes.
I watched a bunch of Hitchcock movies, including Vertigo, Rear Window, North by Northwest. And North by Northwest is just fantastic. And I tapped right into it because, as we'll talk about later, it's kind of the prototypical action movie for today. It sets the stage for what we see throughout 50 more years of action movies, including the James Bond movies, which we'll talk about. But to kind of start and break this down, it's starts off with Cary Grant as Roger Thornhill. He's an ad exec, just kind of a skis, not the super best dude ever. A commentary on advertising, I think.
Yeah.
But he gets mistaken, right? Like it's not the nicest dude.
Well, they even reference
mistaken.
that in the opening dialogue. He even says, he basically admits that he's like, my job is to lie to the public to get them to buy stuff. So at least they don't gloss over it. At least they're honest about it.
That's exactly right. I love, and this is it's a funny movie in that it's a funny Hitchcock movie. Mm-hmm. And it's not that Hitchcock couldn't be clever or silly, because he could throughout his movies, but this is definitely one of his funniest.
For sure.
Cary Grant steals a cab saying that a woman is very sick, and he made him feel good that he's helping her. So look at the value I'm bringing to this man's life as I steal his cab. But he gets mistaken for a secret agent that ends up not existing. And this is he gets set up and charged with a DWI, and a bunch of things stem out of a mistaken identity. And it leads through a bunch of really incredible set pieces and action scenes that, again, influence tons and tons of movies. It has a really great leading lady in it who, Eva Marie Saint, who's awesome, a killer villain, a henchman with really blue eyes, a lot of really, really
what else could you want?
Great movies with Martin Landau. Yeah. You don't need anything else. And that's some of the stuff that it was why I like this movie. Had you guys seen this movie before? Watching it for this thing.
This is the point of the podcast, Jake. We try to pick movies that we haven't seen before. Ben may have seen it. I can't remember.
I have seen this one, and I did remember that I had seen this one, as opposed to Vertigo, where I thought I had, and I hadn't seen it. I had seen this movie for sure.
But no, nice. I had not seen it. I also studied this in a film studies class, and so I had seen the airplane scene. And that's honestly why I picked it. So we wanted to do some rounds that were director specific. We kind of realized there was a lot of incredible directors out there that, it seems like you should probably have seen their movies. And Hitchcock is certainly one of them. And I realized I'd seen exactly 0 of his movies. I thought I had seen...
Not even Psycho?
I thought I had seen Psycho, but what it turns out is I just had studied a bunch of stuff and seen enough of it to understand what's happening.
Right.
So
I wish you had just seen the Gus Van Sant version. Like, that's the only version of Psycho you've seen. It's the one with Vince Vaughn.
To be fair, that is a shot for shock remake.
Right. It is.
Right.
I don't hate it.
And so, I've always been, for whatever reason, North by Northwest was the Hitchcock movie I was most interested in seeing first. Turns out I saw Vertigo first, which was great. But, I was so intrigued by that airplane scene. I always wanted to see it, but apparently not intrigued enough to actually watch it. Matt, what was your overall impression of this movie?
So this is my first North by Northwest experience too, which is surprising because I grew up in a very Hitchcock home. I feel like Steve, before we watched any Disney movies, was putting in VHS tapes of Alfred Hitchcock. Raising us the right way. No, but I'd seen several Hitchcock. I probably saw this at some point, but I'm not counting it because I remembered none of it. And it just felt like, to me, like, I know that I recognize the iconic scenes in it. I recognize like a lot of things that, filmmaking has pulled from it over time. But it just felt like so fresh to me. Like, just the way it was put together, the storytelling, the story itself was just really well put together. And like, I sort of echo Jake, like there's all kinds of James Bond type stuff in it.
Yeah.
That was fun to see. Very, very Bond-esque. And I even like, I was watching like some of those parts where like he's been he's not really framed. He's just been mistaken for somebody else. But like, there's some of those like meetings and like newspaper headlines and stuff that reminded me of Captain America Civil War with the Winter Soldier. That I thought was like a neat thing to call back to, with how much the MCU tries to like play into genres.
Right.
And so that also goes into like the quintessential action movie, you know. But no, I really enjoyed it. It felt totally fresh, and having seen a bunch of Hitchcock, that was awesome. You know, just a new Hitchcock movie for me.
Yeah.
Another notch on the belt.
This one, yeah. I mean, this was a great movie. We talked about it last week with Vertigo, but I mean, this is him in the middle of arguably the greatest 3-year run for movies, where he does Vertigo, North by Northwest, and then Psycho. So I feel like he's firing on all cylinders here. This to me was a prime example. I think if you wanted to show somebody a great movie or a movie that has great sound design, I think this one was it. It was so strong in this movie. I'd also honestly give the same to kind of the set design and the editing, because like the production of the interiors of all these like rooms and restaurants and things like that, like it's amazing the foresight he has, obviously, like when in pre-production, just like, oh, I'm going to be moving the camera like this, because he does a lot of camera movements in this movie. And just how, you know, like we talked about, like he gets mistaken identity, and the way that happens is so quick and so subtle that I think it's easy to miss. You know, if you don't know that like the waiter dude is calling for Kaplan, and then he raises his hand to get the waiter to do a telegraph, if you miss that, you have no idea why he's on the run this whole time. And it's just like, he doesn't hit you over the head with it. It's so subtle. It's so easy to miss. And it's like, oh, that's crazy. That's why then the two guys like, oh, that's Kaplan, because he raised his hand when someone said his name. And if you don't have that, it's not there. And again, that just goes back to the sound design and not like emphasizing the waiter's voice yelling it. Like, it's just like, it's in the murmur of the crowd. I think another great example of it is during the whole crop plane scene. Even while we're waiting for that after he gets dropped off by the bus, like the silence that we sit in for a while, it really makes you feel like you're there. I think someone else would have like maybe played some music or something like very lightly, whatever, but we are just in silence. Again, he's the master of suspense, and he knows what he's doing.
Yeah, I love that, because the score's pretty prevalent throughout the first part of the movie. It drives a lot of the action. You're with it. It's with you. It does an excellent job. A lot of strings and fun action things, and get your heart pumping. And then boom, drops out completely when he's in the cornfield. It's gone. And the first thing, and I love that thing too, it's like the confluence of the editing and the sound design and the set design. The first thing he sees is the crop duster off in the distance. Boom, just there. He sees now 3 cars pass by the guy. So it pulls that crop duster out. It's gone. You've seen it. Pulls it out. You're thinking about, oh, the guy's coming to pick him up. And then, oh, that crop duster's a little odd. It's not dusting any crops over there. And then boom, it gets right into one of the most epic scenes in film history, where he's getting dived by a crop duster. And that's where, you know, you hear a lot of the Dewey effect of the plane forward and getting in as it gets closer. Just bonkers awesome.
Yeah, for sure. I echoing that. I remember thinking when they were in the home at the end of the movie, towards the end of the film, when you can hear the plane landing outside, just the subtle way you can hear it outside. And, you know, Ben and I, we worked at an airport, and it just was like, I mean, obviously that's what an airplane sounds like, but not only that, it's just like that, hearing the drone of it and the way the sound kind of moves around the exterior and all that stuff, while not being overpowering and drowning out the conversation or any of that stuff, was just, I remember just thinking in that moment, like, God damn, like this is really incredible stuff. It's speaking to the sound design. And like you said, Ben, I liked in the diner at the very beginning. First of all, I love how we just jump straight into this thing. Like, we get a little bit of setup of who Thornwell is and the type of guy he is. And then we're straight into the plot. We're straight into the chase. And we're playing catch up the whole time from there. But I liked how the waiter, like you said, was just sort of in the background. It wasn't so like the camera could have, a lot of directors, the camera could have easily just followed the waiter around and had him call for Kaplan and then cut to, you know, Thornwell raising his hand. But I just liked it. It was just like you said, it was in the background. It was just sort of happening. And if you didn't catch it, you didn't catch it. And it seemed very organic, and you could see how the coincidence would have worked out. And I really loved that crazy push zoom he did on the on the bad guys. It was like
Yeah,
very
yeah.
jarring.
I noted
but
that.
really
So
cool.
Loved it.
Yeah, he's the man can work a camera. And because he can work with a camera, and as we've been talking about, he's had such an incredible influence in cinema since. Well, obviously, since he put his movies out,
the beginning of time.
Since the beginning of time, and so it's hard to watch these movies, these Hitchcock movies, and not recognize the things you've seen, and then think about how, retroactively realize that Hitchcock started that thing or did it first. It's like the South Park and Family Guy thing or whatever. Like The Simpsons did it first. That's always referenced in those shows. So I was just curious if there was any scenes in particular that you saw in this movie that reminded you of a scene in another movie, and what those were, and we can talk about that a little bit. Let's go to Jake first. We're gonna go to the guest here.
One that's a quick one before I get into my kind of wider point. I mean, you can find a ridiculous amount of references across movies in this because it was so influential. But a small one that I liked is the scene where the professor is explaining to Thornhill kind of what's been happening as they're walking out through the airport. And the dialogue cuts out and it's all the airplane sound and he's explaining. I like that one, just not even talking about the reference, and that's Hitchcock trusting you to follow along.
Right.
He doesn't have to go through and say, hey, guess what? Like, we've got a fake agent. Like, he doesn't have to really necessarily go through all of that again. He just puts it in there. And when I saw Wonder Woman, the first one, near the end of the movie, where Wonder Woman is talking to Chris Pine's character, and they're kind of like professing their love to each other. All of that gets washed out because of airplane noise. And so it's kind of left a little bit more to your imagination, and you're kind of having to put your own dialogue on it, and just the emotion is played on their faces, and they're both, pretty good actors. So it's really good. I really liked that little brief reference, similarly, though it was played as opposed to just to skip over, a bunch of exposition that we don't need to know. That was a little bit more for an emotional moment. So I liked that. But looking wider, so many movies after this have done the dive bombing with the plane at someone else. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's everywhere. It's Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. It happens. There are a bunch of other ones, but I mentioned this earlier. They do this in From Russia with Love, but with a helicopter. So it's a little bit less blatant, but this was only a few years after North by Northwest. But basically the Broccoli family and, United Artists, I guess, or whoever, they lifted North by Northwest, changed out the agent for, rather than being a mistaken identity, they put the actual agent in it, and they called them James Bond movies. But that's basically what they do. They did it explicitly in From Russia with Love with helicopter, like I said, but otherwise you've got set pieces, you've got big action, you've got,
babes,
a femme fatale, a lot of the times they're working for the bad guy, like, though it just lifted it wholesale. So we can credit almost all of the future Bond movies with North by Northwest, which I like because I like the Bond movies, but it's just really funny to see the beginning of them in a Hitchcock movie.
For sure. Yeah, I was gonna say, if for those listeners that listen to the Ocean's 11 recast, you know what a fan Jake is of 007. So I'm gonna trust your judgment there. I'm following you. I believe it. You are the resident 00X. You're the expert here. I have some really lame expertises, I guess. One is Ocean's 11, two Spawn movies, but they just took Cary Grant's suit and they put it on Sean Connery. And that's like, look at the gray suit that he wears in this movie, and then look at what Sean Connery's wardrobe in From Russia with Love, and Goldfinger and Dr. No. Like,
it's like, oh, this dapper man looks great in this suit.
That's it. He's just wearing the gray suit from North by Northwest. Like, it's hilarious how blatant it is.
I know it just takes place over 2 days, but he's just in that suit almost the entire time, like 96% of the movie. Then they finally let him like take his coat off. He's like, no, you gotta stay tied the whole time.
His pants.
That's true.
Came
Yeah.
out too with a very chaste leg cross as he's checking out to
Yes.
see where Ms. Kendall is off to.
Yeah, indeed. Well, I took away from this, I mean, obviously it had probably been done in some movies before, but it just really hit me how, like we already talked about already, but the silence can really help build tension. I think we see that a lot in horror movies now, where it's just like the quiet is more freaky than anything else. So we had quite a bit of that in here. Mysterious bad guy, which I liked. But the two references I want to make, I feel like the movies are on par with North by Northwest. We're just going top shelf cinema here. Clearly with Mount Rushmore, I forget what it's really called since we have Rushmore Mountain, but with Mount Rushmore, obviously we got to tie into Richie Rich. I mean, that's a clear, like, I don't know how you don't see that, you know, Macaulay Culkin, Cary Grant, just together. They're there, you know.
Two peas in the same pod.
That's when I hear
exactly.
Cary Grant, I instantly think
Different
Macaulay
sides of the same
Culkin.
coin.
Instantly.
Exactly. Yes. Cary Grant could not do Home Alone, but Macaulay Culkin could do North by Northwest. So, and then the other one is that Frank Lloyd Wright style house that we see at the end of the bad guys.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, Fuzz, you kind of brought this up for me, but it's very reminiscent of that house from Pineapple Express, which if you haven't seen Pineapple Express, the first half, so good. I love the first half.
Man, listen, I would just appreciate it if both y'all would just take your shoes off me. This is brand new carpet. You're tracking mud in here. Man said you got British Knights on. I ain't seen anybody wear them since 1987.
Ow! What the hell are you doing?
Ted told me to kill him.
Well, how about a little fucking discretion here?
But yeah, so I mean, those were like the two that I thought of. It was hard to pinpoint exact references because it just feels like it's everything, you know what I mean? Like, it's just like, oh yeah, we've seen this all over and it's great, but like I can't like pick particular things, but I just think that speaks to Hitchcock's influence on cinema as a whole. For
sure. That's fair. Yeah, I mean, you could probably throw a dart at most movies and they'd probably tie to a Hitchcock scene
its
somewhere.
DNA is spread far and wide.
Yeah.
100%.
Matt, did you have anything in specific you could think of?
Yeah, there are a couple scenes there, and really, Hitchcock probably pulled them from some Kurosawa films. But there's the across the road scene when that guy arrives right before the crop duster, kind of like the stare down, and that wide.
My favorite shot of the whole movie,
looking across the road at each other, and then he does it again in the woods after he like rescues Eve.
Right.
Yeah. They're in the woods and she's in the car on one side. He's, you know, on the other side. And so just like those wider shots where they're just like standing across from each other and like no one has a conversation like that far across.
Yeah.
And so
I like to stand awkwardly 15 feet apart.
Like a samurai. Like a samurai standoff.
Exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, we see that in The Last Jedi. We see that in, you know, Westerns. But it was cool to see that in a completely different context. You know, Hitchcock kind of just like took that technique or that aesthetic and applied it for his own use, which I thought was cool. And also, I also you brought up South Park. I never not think of the lice episode when someone says luck had nothing to do with it. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the lice episode.
I've seen it, but I don't remember. But I really like.
Oh man, then you'll have to find that clip.
Oh, I'll put it in there. Don't worry.
Oh, it's going in.
Luck had nothing to do with it, Travis.
That'll be our next copyright dispute. Yeah, that scene, the wide shot of the two men across the road was my favorite shot from the whole movie. I feel like if I were to put together and in fact, I think Ben, you were trying to do this at one point. So my apologies for not helping you with this project, but that's the scene I would pick from this movie. If I had to pick a scene to hang on my wall or something, I love that a lot.
Yeah.
It's the expanse of it is so pretty. It's like the ugliest place on earth. And it's meant to be. It's meant to be like so backwater, backwoods, nothing's there.
Great Depression.
But it's seriously, it evokes the Dust Bowl. You're like, how is things growing here? Even the corn is crap that he gets to do. It's falling all over, but it's like so pretty. And I feel like after this movie, and I, again, can't speak for before, but in the, the 30 years of or 40 years of cinema before, I feel like everybody after that, if you're ever shooting anything in a flat, Indiana, Kansas expanse, you cut the sound out and you just let it that light wind.
Yeah.
I was like Castaway did that. It's anytime you're shooting anything like that, you have to do it the same way. It just makes it so much prettier and cooler.
Yeah. I mean, if it's not broke, don't fix it, right?
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. The way he framed the shot when the bus dropped him off. I mean, we were so high up and we're watching that bus come in, and like I spoke to it again already, but like, I love how much he will linger on a shot.
Yeah.
When a director now would just like, okay, we'll cut to him getting off the bus. Like, no, we're staying here 100 feet off the ground and we're just going to watch him get out. We're going to watch the bus leave. We're going to watch him look around a little bit. Then we'll go down and join him. And just like the way it's framed up with like the vanishing lines, like when you're learning art for the first time, it's like, yeah, draw, a dot here and put all the lines towards that. Like there's a shot later on, right before he steals the car, and the horizon is like almost perfectly center. And just that road is just going right down the middle. It's just like, it's amazing what, he knows what he's doing. The shots are beautiful. I love his choice.
Absolutely.
I was so obsessed with that shot that I had to find out where it was shot. And it wasn't in the center of the country. It was in California, actually, in the Central Valley near Castro,
I just want to
California.
know how they did it. Like, considering it was 58, I'm like, is that just a big ass crane or what are they doing?
Probably.
Seriously.
Yeah, if I had to guess, I mean, that is one of the coolest parts about watching these movies, and the way he can move his camera and how it's so smooth and how it's so well crafted, and just knowing what it takes to get a shot like that, even with technology today, and knowing what they had to go through. It is pretty incredible. Like going back to the Vertigo episode, I did some research, and they filmed the famous Vertigo effect on the stair sets. They filmed those sideways with miniature models.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
that makes sense.
Yeah, cool. It's just the ingenuity and the way they were able to put all that together. There is a scene in this movie that if you know me, I love The Big Lebowski, and there's no way you cannot connect these two scenes. And it's funny because the scene I'm talking about in North by Northwest is our boy Richard
Thornhill.
Thornhill. I was gonna say Threadwell. Our boy Richard Kaplan, whatever you want to call him. He is trying to figure out what's going on with our femme fatale Eve Kendall, and he's in her room, and he's a little suspicious of her, and she gets a phone call and writes something on a pad of paper. And when she's out of the room, he takes his pencil and turns it on the side and reveals what she had written in the impression of the paper. And in The Big Lebowski, this is a famous scene where he does the exact same thing in a similar situation, and it's revealed to be a funny little dick cartoon. And when I first saw The Big Lebowski, and honestly all through it, that scene was always funny to me, but I didn't really get it. I mean, I got what was happening, but it just like, it didn't resonate with me the same way it did with a lot of people. Like that's when I hear people talk about this movie, that's a scene that comes up quite a bit, and people just love that scene, and for good reason. It is hilarious. But it just didn't really resonate. And so seeing it play out in this movie, it made it like retroactively 10 times funnier to me, because I just pictured myself being in the position where I had seen this scene before, and it was such a cool, interesting, clever thing to do. And then just having it flipped with that silly dick picture. I don't know. It just made it 10 times funnier for me. And I just love that they do this in film, right? Like, these things aren't so precious that you can't do it later. Yeah. You can't use it in your own way. I really like that. I think it's really cool.
It's a great way for the Coens to like pay homage to Hitchcock, but still be true to themselves.
For sure. Yeah. Speaking of the Coens and sound design in vast expanses, No Country for Old Men, they use that effect to great effect. And I hadn't really thought about that until just now, but I mean,
and Fargo too, even though it's snow everywhere, but it's that same thing. It's a linger. Let's look at that just flat, nasty snow and just let it breathe.
Absolutely.
I think he used it a lot just for the dimension aspect of it, just to show the size of what these people are versus like these things that people see all the time. But I think his bigger influence on culture, but also, I mean, it's hard for me to separate his influence from film, but I think he did a really good job of making the everyday guy can be a bad guy, can be a monster. I think before then, like we had like Universal movies with like Dracula and all that kind of stuff, you know?
Yeah.
But then like we meet Norman Bates, you know, and it's like, he's weird, but you know, whatever. But also
he seems nice.
Yeah, he's a very nice dude. He wants to make sure I don't slip while I'm in the shower. It's very nice of him. But I think also like making the protagonist not just a genuinely good person all the way across. Not that that hadn't been done before. I mean, obviously, like with Rick and Casablanca, like he's not just like a clean cut, you know, straight dude, but you know, in Psycho, it starts out, you know, because they stole money, so they're driving off, you know, and in this one, like we established, like he's not a super great guy, you know. He's like, hey, you call my mom, I don't want to talk to her. I don't know. It's just like he's able to create.
He's afraid of getting dragged by her so well. Like
she was just
but good quips.
Yeah, she was throwing rocks, you know, to bring you back to Lebowski. She was just like knocking him down.
This is the cabinet where they keep the liquor. Scotch, gin, vodka.
And bourbon. I remember when it used to come in bottles.
But yeah, I just think it did a good job of that. And like a lot what happened with Jaws, you know, after that came out and people being freaked out about going into the ocean stuff. I think that same stuff kind of happens here, you know, again, like to draw it to Psycho, where it's like these things stay rooted in you, whether you know it or not. And it's because you're not like watching Frankenstein or like a Mummy or something like that, where you're like, oh, I can step out and that's gone. It's like you could step out of the theater and be like, is that a Norman Bates that I sat next to the whole time? Like, I don't know, you know, like, I don't know who the bad guy is and who isn't. And in my limited experience of film, this was really kind of the beginning of that to me. I know there are a lot smarter people out there that can probably correct me 100 ways, but in my experience, like, oh, this was the first time where there's a lot of gray area in every character, which I think was kind of cool.
For sure.
Speaking to like his impact in film, like you said, like it's hard to separate it, especially with American history and like what we've seen in film now. Like you brought up landmarks, and I have to say he handles landmarks in such a more, and maybe films of that time did too, but in a way more reverent way than we do today. Like in an action movie today, Mount Rushmore would have been blown up, you know, like something would have happened to it and they wouldn't have gotten like a cool shot from it. Like they would have set the location and it would have been like exotic, you know, like, oh, we're at Mount Rushmore. But you wouldn't get shots up Thomas Jefferson's nostril. You wouldn't get these weird like contours of the faces.
The eyes too. You can see that like the pupils are all goofy. Yeah.
And like Ben mentioned, like the scale, like showing the scale, the change of scale, like the contrast, like from the macro view and the micro view. Like it's just like fantastic, like storytelling.
It's funny that you say that too. Oh, go ahead, Tyler.
No, it's because that's to me, that's why I brought up the landscapes or the landmarks, because, you know, we see landmarks in movies all the time. Like any New York movie showed the Twin Towers before 9/11 and they still show the skyline. And so, you know, a lot of movies have used landmarks, but the landmarks in the movies that I've seen so far, and again, Ben, to back you up on your, maybe someone will correct me here, point. The point of this podcast is to learn and experience, not to be the experts in film. But I feel like the way that Hitchcock uses the landmarks is he actually uses them and they play important roles in the story. Like in Vertigo, it's the Golden Gate Bridge, and in North by Northwest, it's obviously Mount Rushmore. But I forgot where I was going with that. So...
No, I think I can crib off of what you're saying in that. So I did, in a little bit of research that I was doing, Hitchcock and Ernest Lehman, who wrote the screenplay, there's a little bit of disagreement, but between them both, they had thought of some cool set pieces, basically. They really wanted to do something on Mount Rushmore. And Hitchcock really wanted to do something at the UN building. And he had some other ideas floating, but him being just first like a populist filmmaker of what can I make that's going to get people like really, excited and hyped?
Yeah.
And where can I tap into bits of Americana, which are, Mount Rushmore. It's all of, our most revered men up on a freaking mountain carved into granite.
Right.
So he's like, I want to use that for something. I'm going to do, really cool, fun little chase scene. And then he's also like, I'm going to do something in the UN where, it's the countries coming together. It's nonviolence, it's peace, it's post World War II, like future. And I want to stab a guy in the back.
Yeah, so cool.
Which is just awesome. Again, it's his twisted little like, I want to subvert this slightly. And apparently, again, in the research, the UN read the script and wouldn't let him film there. So they had to get that really cool spy shot of Cary Grant going up the steps as he's getting out of the cab. They just did that. They didn't have permission to do that. And it also led to, probably because of the constraint, but that incredible composite shot where he's shooting down the facade of the building as Cary Grant's running out alone, just completely from the top and gets in that cab. You guys remember that shot?
Yeah, I do.
Which I love. It's so cool. And it's wild to think again about the technology of the time and how, the tricks they had to do to get that down. But he used those landmarks to get, here's our Americanness coming through, or here's us as a global, peace organization. Let's fiddle with this a little bit. Yeah. Let's get some potentially Soviet, who knows, spies on Mount Rushmore with microfiche in a Mexican statue, and let's get them falling off of it. That other great shot of the guy tumbling off, which incredible.
Hitchcock loves falling.
He does.
He loves falling scenes.
Love it.
Right, and it's those bits like, let's tap into America, but let me just twist the knife just a little bit and get you do something memorable here. I loved that, but utilizing those landmarks in a really cool way.
Yeah. Oh shoot, I lost my train of thought again. If anyone has something fun to say, I'm now down to -1 points.
I just wanted like one of the things that we kind of talked about already, but a particular scene that, this movie's really funny, and I loved Cary Grant's performance during the whole auction. I thought good. He was great.
So good.
11 once, we'll say 12. 11 twice, 12. Thank you. 12 is bid. I have 12. Go 13. Who'll say 13?
$13.
You mean 1,300, sir?
No, I mean $13. That's more than it's worth.
Because he's able to like turn it on and off, when he approaches them, he's very, and the guy even kind of calls him on. He's like, oh, you should have gone to the actor's studio, he's so much different than the first time they meet, where he's like, I'm not Kaplan, I'm Thornhill. He's like, oh, it's great. Yeah, that's what I've heard. And this time it's like, oh, great to see the three of you together. Like, it's almost threatening, because he's survived death a few times now. So like, what the fuck do I have to lose? Like, I'm just going to come after these guys. And it was so good. And then to like see that all his exits are blocked, he's like, okay, how can I do this? And then just to turn it into like a comedic scene, and it's so funny, like everyone's turning on him, like, what are you doing? Like, please respect, like what we're doing here. He's like, $13, like 13 and not 1,300. Like,
and
I don't know.
And everybody's pissed. They were pissed before, but then they just laugh. It's like
and
they
then
can't help it. Like, oh my gosh,
and then you guys are getting carried out. It's like, I said $3,000. This is absurd. I think that one scene is a great example that you could like show people when it comes to acting, of like Cary Grant. Obviously he's a fucking great actor, but just within that 5-minute span, we got to see him almost like a threatening Bond type person, but then going to the other end where like he could be, Don Knotts funny stuff like that, which is like kind of goofball slapstick stuff. And I don't know. I was really impressed to see how that got handled and how they played it, because either one of those extremes could have not worked. But I think this scene just worked wonderfully, and it's all due to Cary Grant.
Yeah. The same one is the drunk tank scene where he's getting interviewed by the doctor.
Although I will say, if you chug a pint of bourbon, you're way more hungover than he is the next morning. I promise you. But anyway,
oh my god! Like when he said that, like in the hotel, he's like, "Give me a pint." Like, a pint? What? Like, you drink a pint of beer, you do not drink a pint of bourbon. That's insane. That's crazy to me. But yeah,
that's funny. Oh, the elevator scene was funny too. Like, everyone's had that moment. It's like, "Oh, mom, please don't. Oh, mom, oh."
gentlemen aren't really trying to kill my son, are you?
She was great. The mom was great. Like, you talk about some of the
So good.
supporting cast, like his mom was wonderful. We've already talked about him, but Martin Landau was a fucking stud back then. Like, I always thought he was 80. I thought he was born with those eyebrows, you know, just like
Josh Romney.
eyes, but
he looks like Josh Romney. And Josh Romney, if you're listening to the pod, please like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe. We'll make you a
Get
Martin
your dad
Landau
Nick
shirt.
we'll send some chocolate milk.
But I thought Martin Landau was great, and he reminded me.
So
he
good.
kind of gave me the vibes of like Daniel Kaluuya in Widows. I don't know if any of you have seen that, but just like a very intimidating right hand person. Highly recommend Widows to anybody that, you know, really wants a good heist kind of action film. That was great. But Daniel Kaluuya was wonderful in that, and he was just more scary than the bad guy in that movie. And I felt the same way about Martin Landau in this. I'm like, I'm more worried about that guy than the
For
actual
sure.
bad guy. Like, Landau's the one that's kind of freaking me out here.
Yeah, he's the one with the blood on his hands, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. So they're really good. Even Marie Saint, we haven't talked about her a ton, but she held her own. You know, I mean, like Cary Grant, like that's a tall order to like be up against and share a lot of that, like I can't think of the word, but very important screen time, and she does it, and she's wonderful. So yeah, I just want to get shout out to some of the other actors, you know, and obviously James Mason is always great. So yeah, this was a solid cast, and Cary Grant was leading the way really well.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to echo you guys. It for sure is the funniest Hitchcock movie that I've ever seen. But it was the funniest one. It was a lot more funny than I was expecting it to be, and both by design, and maybe what I'm about to say was by design too. But the funniest thing to me was just Thornwell's like the sheer indignation that he could possibly be, you know, treated this way. You know, like it just like the cat is like the cavalier way in which he dealt with every situation, and just like he literally almost murdered people with his car driving drunk, and he's just like riffing with the cops. You know what I mean? Like, granted, he was pretty drunk, but even in court, like, or when he's being kidnapped, and he's just like riffing away at these guys and just like needling and puns and jokes and sarcasm, and it's like, dude, they have a gun to your chest, and he's just like, it's fine, I'll be fine, nothing bad ever happens to me. And it's just like, honestly, it was sort of like a representation of like the male American ego, you know what I mean? Just like that privilege, and just like like how incredulous he was that the fact that any of this could be happening, and how seemingly unconcerned he was the whole time. That may have been by design, I'm not sure, maybe it's just a reflection of the time, but I was dying. Like, it just killed me.
It's definitely a little bit of both of that, right? Like, he's an untouchable rich white guy with a secretary that he can call his mom, and he's going to shows, and he's meeting people in the Oak Room at the Ritz-Carlton.
Sure.
So yeah, nothing really bad happens to him, nor should it, as far as he's concerned. You know,
this is preposterous.
Which is really funny. Yeah, and it kind of goes and reflects really well on Ava Marie Saint, that she kind of got a little bit of a raw deal as far as some of the story choices made were a little retrograde for her. Like, I would have liked to have I mean, I know that they do this later, and they establish that in this world, Cary Grant is so hot that he bursts into a woman's hospital room, and she basically is like, "Don't go, man! Like, like let's see where this goes."
That was one of the weirdest scenes.
Yeah, she's like,
all right. All right, Alfred. Like, okay, cool. Could have cut that probably, but
that's right. I would have liked a little bit of change there, but like Ava Marie Saint, like, despite those handicaps of being stuck in 1958-59, like, she really, really kills it.
Oh, for sure. And you know, it's revealed her character is in a really tough spot, and is handling her situation very well. You know, she's a woman who got thrown into this life and is now doing her best to, you know, double agent this thing. She's trying to spy on the spies here, and she's holding her own. She kills it. You know, she is a phenomenal femme fatale. And I do think we should disclaimer here a little bit, in that we have obviously we have a reverence for Hitchcock and the movies he's made, but his treatment of women and Hollywood's treatment of women in general, and the way that they're, for lack of a better word, used in the stories. You know, I'm glad we're moving away from that, and we've talked about this on different podcast, the Marvel podcast, but I'm glad to see that, you know, because Eve Marie Saint and her character in this movie, Eve Kendall, you know, she's a badass chick, but she just in this story she gets a raw deal, and that's the unfortunate thing, especially with Hitchcock. He's known for having some issues with the women in his movies, for which you know, I'm not excited about. But so we got to talk about the bad along with the good.
Well,
I don't want to spend. Oh,
Sorry.
no, go ahead. I said I was going to say I don't want to spend too much time on it, but if you've got something you want to say, like, by all means, like.
I just thought it was interesting that in the woods, when Cary Grant gets like really upset at like the secret agency, he even like says like, "How dare you throw her into a situation like that," or something like that. I'm like, oh, that could be applied to all of old Hollywood.
Yes.
Yeah.
To the actresses.
Right.
But
absolutely.
I guess before we move on to how we're closing this, I did just want to call out a few like just like perfect textbook examples of storytelling that Alfred Hitchcock puts into this, and one of them being the matchbook.
Absolutely.
They establish you know this emblem that he has on his matchbook and what it means and like all that, and they do this in a conversation where you are going to remember that when you see it again. At that pivotal scene, you know, he pulls out the matchbook and you immediately know like, oh, she's going to recognize that because I recognize that. And it's like, I mean, that's giving the audience so much credit to it's trusting the audience so much, but it's rightfully, it's done so well that of course you're going to trust them to remember that. I just feel like we don't see that as much anymore. Like there's not those things being connected, those things being established early on to have a big payoff. I mean, it does happen. And I think the better filmmakers still do it, but I just feel like it was such a textbook example of it. And then just to stay on that scene where he like throws it down, I loved the just subtle subverting of expectations when the henchman picks it up, Leonard picks it up, and you think like, oh crap. They just like tosses it on the table. It's like, Hitchcock, Alfred.
Yeah,
you're giving us a heart attack
again. Keep you on the edge of your seat for sure. That's a fantastic point. And friend of the podcast, Adam Palcher from Deep Dive Film School. I always want to say a damn movie podcast, even though that's the oldest variation of their name. But Deep Dive Film School. He's going to be a guest here coming up soon, and he's been one of the people I've learned a lot from as far as movies and cinema is concerned. And that's one thing he harps on all the time is trusting your audience and how so much can be shown but not told. And, you know, it can be more subtle than it is. You don't need to be hit over the head with it. So that's something that I always look for. And you're absolutely spot on correct, where Hitchcock, whether he trusts the audience or not, if you're not paying attention, you know, you're not going to get it. But he also does it in a way where it's easy to kind of follow what's going on. Like when we're introduced to the matchbook, it's in a way that's organic to the story, but becomes very important later. And it's a very clever balance to do.
Yeah. Well, like you said, when you brought up the plane arriving, it's like he's playing on all facets of filmmaking. Like you have to hear that, to understand that part of the story, you have to hear the plane arrive, even though you're not seeing it.
That's how he's been getting it.
Whatever you do, don't get on that plane.
It creates that sort of urgency in that setting.
Right.
And so like to enjoy the picture, it's like, this is like what it's supposed to be like, you know, the sound, the picture, like everything's supposed to be playing together, and Alfred Hitchcock does it. Yeah,
masterfully. So we've talked at length about Cary Grant, and I want to talk a little bit more about him. Shout out to Ashley, one of our patrons, one of our strongest supporters, Watch Party MVP, the reigning MVP. She mentioned that Cary Grant may be the most handsome leading man of all time, which I don't know if I can or will argue that point. She also was curious who we thought was the Cary Grant of today. And so I thought that was a fun discussion and something we could talk about right now. Jake, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, this is a very interesting, funny question because Cary Grant is like, I swear, if you just tossed out handsome actor, it would probably be Cary Grant's picture in the dictionary, right?
Right.
Like that's the guy that you put. He's, he's tall, he's tan, he's got the, cleft chin, like,
Yeah.
So I get that 100%. I was thinking of, as I was looking through this, and I actually just barely came to me, but Robert Redford would probably be up there.
Oh yeah.
Where
solid.
And yeah, he's a little bit blonder, so that's a little bit of a pivot from kind of the darker. But dude, that jaw can cut granite, and he's played like in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Like, is there a more attractive dude in a movie ever? Like, as a cowboy, I'm sorry, like that's it.
Yeah.
So I would think Redford might challenge him, though. He's kind of in that space between Cary Grant being classic cinema, and then in that shift through the 70s, and more kind of auteur driven, and it kind of cinema starts kind of exploding out a little bit more. Where today's just crazy.
Yeah.
So I would think maybe Redford would challenge, and then for today, maybe Brad Pitt. Yeah. And like he and Cary Grant in this movie and he are about the same age, and he's just kind of been rolling as like the hottest guy ever. He's a little bit more of a character actor guy, where Cary Grant was a leading man all the time.
That would
so
be
I don't
my
know if that's
argument.
The perfect parallel.
I was gonna say Brad Pitt too, but
I get that.
Yeah, the same reason. I was like, I mean, most of his movies, the ones I dislike the most of his is when he is the leading man. Like not always, but he's. I like him better as a character actor.
You didn't like Troy?
Right.
I did not like Troy.
We were talking about this, Ashley and I was kind of throwing out that I don't know that anyone tops Cary Grant. I think there are some like uncharacteristically handsome guys like Steve McQueen, Rock Hudson, those kind of guys where it's like they're handsome, but again, like compared to Cary Grant, I just don't know that you can do that. While Jake may have gone with the Sundance Kid, I think Butch Cassidy himself, Paul Newman, is up there in the running. He was a very handsome dude. So again, like I don't know that he's on salad dressings. You know what I mean? Like he's a handsome guy.
Again, that visage just it sells.
It sells. Yeah,
you see it and you're like, I don't
even use it. I just want the bottles. Yeah, like I don't even eat salad.
And it's not even.
I don't want this.
It's not even a picture of him from his most handsome time. It's
no, because they couldn't do that to us.
Not even
be off the shelves. It'd be
my gosh,
it'd be like toilet papers during COVID. It's just like there's no salad dressing, no Newman's Own. But I think my number one answer, and it's unfortunately very short lived, but I think it's James Dean, is probably one of the most handsome, leading men ever. He's just classically handsome. Obviously, we didn't get him for a super long time, but he'd be up there. As far as today, I mean, we just keep naming movies that people are in together. It's like, let's just go with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, because I think Leo is kind of today's guy, let's get Brad and Leo together. And then, let's watch Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and then The River Runs Through It, or Butch Cassidy. Like, that's all these handsome dudes. But that'd probably be my guess, would be Leo.
Yeah, I mean, you got Matt.
Other than Oscar Isaac. Oscar Isaac is classically handsome and the best Danny Ocean. I'll take no questions. Matt, your turn.
At this point, that episode has already aired, Ben. Your petitions are useless.
I'm drawing people back to it. I was right.
I've subtracted 2 points from your score on this episode.
If I won, I was vindicated. If I didn't win, this is why you were all wrong.
I mean, Cary Grant. I mean, you take Zack Snyder's Snyder Cut, and if that were filmed in the 60s,
see where this is going.
If that were filmed in the 60s,
more on board right now.
If that were filmed in the 60s, Cary Grant would play Batman, Superman, Aquaman, Wonder Woman, and the Flash. He's he's the superhero.
Yeah,
and
I like it. Sidney Poitier is Cyborg.
Yeah.
You're good to go.
There you go. But no, I mean, Brad Pitt is compelling for like today's Leo. Yeah, I mean, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, geez. But I don't know. You might have to go with, and I got, we keep bringing up the Ocean's recast. I was chastised for saying anything negative. Heaven forbid I say anything negative about George Clooney, but Clooney, man, I mean, he might be.
Yeah.
He's one that's like a really good analog because he's aging ridiculously well, and it's not fair.
Yeah.
And I don't know what or why or how, but like, and that's like Cary Grant in North by Northwest is 54, I think. When this, like, he's still, again, he's bursting into the hospital rooms, and they're like, "Yeah, let's roll.
Yeah, let's do this thing."
Yeah, dude, still got it. I see Clooney as a decent analog.
For sure.
I mean, has there been like a more tan elderly man since like George Hamilton or something? Like he did not have a tan line anywhere on his body.
No,
like he was a bronze god. He looked great.
That's right. It's seeing him like with Emery Saint, where she's, light complexion, the light hair, the, porcelain skin, and man is just like, he's just walking off the beach in Malibu every day before he gets to the studio. Like,
I'm sure he literally is. I mean, he's got to be rich beyond his wildest dreams in the golden era of Hollywood, living in LA. Like, the dude was on the beach plenty, taking advantage of his climate. That's for sure.
The beach come to him.
Yeah, right. So
I don't know what that means.
I can't really add too much to the list you guys have put out. It's raining men here at the Three Films in a Podcast, and I just
hallelujah.
Hallelujah. But I will throw in for most handsome of all time. I'm going to throw Harrison Ford in the mix and see what the people think about that.
Oh man,
is that earring, man?
Blade Runner Harrison, like it's classic.
But as far as today's, I'm actually going to kind of I'm going to do something a little sneaky here, and it's kind of a bummer. But I was talking with a friend over the weekend about Heath Ledger, and we were talking about, obviously we've been robbed, and I just know rewatching in our rom-com fest, I rewatched 10 Things I Hate About You, and you can't not be swept away and charmed by that man. And, obviously he's been in a lot of, he's played a lot of incredible roles. And, I love A Knight's Tale, and I've been rewatching Dark Knight and all that stuff. But just specifically his charm and that smile he can flash. And like, I was like, okay, I'm falling for Heath Ledger here. You know what I mean? Like,
I actually started to fall for this
smile,
guy.
The accent,
yeah,
the hair.
it's just,
come on.
yeah, like I just can't help but think if we had been lucky enough to have him stick around, rest in peace, Heath Ledger. But I could see him easily being the most handsome man on the planet at this point in time.
And if you're not careful, you find yourself falling for Joker Ledger,
Sure, yeah.
He has his hair greased back in just the right way. It's like
he certainly has his charms. But so yeah, that's kind of a bummer to take it, but that's the one I could think of, and it's just more so a hypothetical, but I thought I'd throw it out there. Well, fellas, I don't know. I'm sure we could honestly talk about Hitchcock and this movie and all the things it's influenced, and this conversation can spider web into a bunch of different ways. So, well, shoot, I think that's as good a place as any to end it. Jake, shout out, thanks again for coming on. It's always a pleasure. The conversation is great. I always love your insight. You're welcome back anytime. You leave today's episode with 2 points. Yes. And just because I like you, I'll give you a third, and we'll declare you the winner of the North by Northwest episode.
Next week, Matt. Next week.
It's not fair, I know, but it is what it is.
I'd like to thank everyone who got me here.
You're welcome
today. God for giving me this computer.
Sure.
And you guys for letting me be on the pod. It's I really look forward to it. It's really fun.
Absolutely.
And again, I love to listen, so I'll go back and listen and wait for this one. But thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
For sure. For those of you out there that are interested in being a guest on the podcast, reach out. You can find us on Instagram, DMs, on Twitter, wherever. Some of you might have our phone numbers. Don't call after 10. Yeah, and there are options on our Patreon that you can look at that can get you more involved in the podcast. But regardless, we're just happy you're here, whether it's on Instagram, Apple Podcasts. I'm just gonna go with that. Spotify, wherever you're finding us, we're glad you did, and thank you for joining us. And we'll see you next time.
See ya.
See ya.
Hey.
Give me a bedroom on the 20th century, please.
Leaving in 5 minutes.
Yes, I know. Could you make it snap in?
I think they're all sold out.
They're sold out.
You can always go coach.
No, I can't do that. What time is the next train?
Nothing till 10. You're in a hurry, huh?
Well, could you call them and see what they have?
Something wrong with your eyes?
Yes, they're sensitive to questions. Will you call them?